Hello everyone, welcome to Drishti IAS. You're watching the Current Affairs Plus series wherein we discuss those topics that have been making the headlines recently but are also important from a UPSC Prelims point of view, meaning the UPSC has asked questions from these topics in the previous years. So let's discuss today's topic, which is the governor, and without further ado, let's look into why this topic has been making the rounds. So recently, our Honorable President Draupadi Murmu ji has approved the reshuffling of various governors and lieutenant governors of several states. They are basically 9 states which include Telangana, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Nagaland, Bihar, West Bengal and Union territories like Ladakh and Delhi, along with the state of Himachal Pradesh. So that is why this topic is in news. Now let's look at the previous year's questions that have been asked from the topic. UPSC Prelims 2025 question asked, with reference to the Indian polity, consider the following statements. 1. The governor of a state is not answerable to any court for the exercise and performance of the powers and duties of his or her office. Now this statement has been mentioned in Article 361 Clause 1 of the Indian Constitution, and it is accurate. The governor is indeed not answerable to any court for his official actions. However, his action, the action can still be questioned in the court, meaning that the official action is still subject to judicial review. This statement, however, is correct. Statement 2 says, no criminal proceedings shall be instituted or continued against the governor during his or her term of office. Now again, with this statement, this is also accurate, and this has been discussed in Article 361 Clause 2, wherein it says that no criminal proceedings will be initiated against the governor. Also, if there are any pending proceedings, they shall also not be continued. And finally, no arrest and imprisonment can take place during the term of the governor's tenure. However, please notice that we are talking about criminal proceedings. In case of civil proceedings can take place but with a 2 months notice. So for criminal proceedings, it cannot take place, but with civil proceedings 2 months notice is required. The next statement says, members of a state legislature are not liable to any proceedings in any court in respect of anything said within the house. Now again, this statement is also correct, and this has been discussed in Article 194 Clause 2 of the Indian Constitution, where it is mentioned that the MLA or the member of the state legislative council is not liable to any proceedings in any court for anything that he or she said within the house or any vote that she or he has cast within the house. So this statement is correct, and a similar provision has been provided even for the members of parliament, and that provision has been provided under Article 105 Clause 2. Now, since all the 3 statements are correct, therefore option D is a correct answer. UPSC Prelims 2019 asked a question, which one of the following suggested that the governor should be an eminent person from outside the state and should be a detached figure without intense political links, or should not have taken part in politics in the recent past? So various committees and commissions have been given in the option, and you have to determine that these parameters or these criteria for the appointment of governor has been discussed in which of these. Now we have quite a few here, and the correct answer very straightforwardly is option C. However, In case we are not aware of the correct answer, which is Sarkaria Commission, which was instituted in 1983 to determine center-state relations. However, if we are not sure whether this answer is correct or not, we should be able to eliminate. Let's see how. First option is First Administrative Reforms Commission. Needless to say, it must be focusing more on administrative reforms and governance related issue. So we can rule this out. Then option B, Rajamannar Committee of 1969. Now this was set up by the Tamil Nadu government, and of course it also had discussed center-state relations, and its main recommendation was to reduce central or center's powers. That was the main recommendations. However, the specific focus was not the criteria for the appointment of a governor. So again, this will be ruled out. Option D, National Commission to review the working of the Constitution of 2000. Now this was headed by M.N. Venkatachalya ji, and here, while they were endorsing the Sarkaria Commission recommendations, the original idea still comes from option C, which is Sarkaria Commission. Hence, option C is your correct answer. UPSC Prelims 2018 question. Consider the following statements. 1. No criminal proceedings shall be instituted against the governor of a state in any court during his term of office. This statement we've discussed in the previous question, and see how questions are interlinked and one option or one statement is oftentimes repeated in the next year's questions. So this we know is correct. The second one says the emoluments and allowances of the governor of a state shall not be diminished during his term of office. Now there are certain things about the emoluments and allowances that we need to keep in mind for a governor. For example, the first thing that we need to keep in mind is that the governor is entitled to a residence without payment of rent. So an official residence is provided to the governor and he or she is not required to pay the rent for it. Second, of course, the governor is provided with various emoluments, allowances, privileges, which are from time to time determined by the parliament, students. It is determined by the parliament. Now, if the governor is appointed for more than one states, then this amount is divided by those states in a proportion that is determined by the president. Finally, the thing to remember is that all these privileges, allowances, emoluments of the governor cannot be reduced during his or her term in office. Now, if we remember this, option 2 is correct, and therefore both A and B are correct, and therefore option C is the correct answer. I hope this is clear. UPSC Prelims 2014 question. Which of the following are the discretionary powers given to the governor of a state? 1. Sending a report to the President of India for imposing the president's rule. Now this indeed is the discretionary power of the governor under Article 356. So the governor can report to the president that the constitutional machinery of a state has failed. And this is definitely under the discretion of the governor. So this statement is correct. Statement 2 says appointing the ministers. Now under Article 164, the governor is bound by the aid and advice of the chief minister for the appointment of various ministers. So this is not the discretion of the governor. Once we eliminate this statement, we can see that almost A, C and D, all the other options get eliminated and we are left with the correct answer, which is option number B. But for the sake of it, let's also look at this third statement, which says reserving certain bills passed by the state legislature for consideration of the President of India. Definitely the discretion of the governor under Article 200. And the fourth says making the rules to conduct the business of the state government. Now, again, it is actually under Article 166. It is indeed the duty of the governor to ascertain that the state government runs its business smoothly, but it's not the discretion of the governor to do so, and these rules are also made by the aid and advice of the cabinet of the state, the chief minister. So this again we can rule out and arrive at the correct answer, which is option number B. Now let's take a look at the appointment process of the governor. This process has been discussed in part 6 of the Indian Constitution. Now let's begin with Article 153, which mandates that there is going to be a governor for every state. With the 7th Amendment of the Constitution, however, it was discussed that one governor can actually take over more than one state simultaneously. Article 154 states that the executive power of the state is vested officially in the governor. Article 155 talks about the appointment of the governor, wherein it discusses that the governor is appointed by the president by a warrant under his hand and seal. So this is about the appointment. Further, of course, we are talking about the term of office of the governor. For how long does the governor stay in office? So there is no fixed period, and the governor stays in the office during the pleasure of the president. Usually, standard term is 5 years from the date of assuming office. However, sometimes it also happens that until a new governor takes over and takes charge, the incumbent governor continues to hold office. Of course, the Constitution has not really specified any grounds for the removal of the governor, and therefore they can be removed or transferred anytime. Also, the governor can himself or herself resign by writing directly to the president. Now, what are the eligibility criteria for the appointment of a governor? So they are very basic. The governor has to be a citizen of India and should be at least 35 years of age. Next, of course, we are talking about the conditions of office. So what other conditions should a governor meet apart from the basic eligibility criteria? So the governor should neither be an MP nor an MLA or MLC for that matter. The government should not be a member of either house of the parliament and either house of the state legislature. And if a sitting member is indeed appointed as the governor, then their seat is considered to be vacated the day they resume office as the governor. So next are the allowances and emoluments of the governor. These we have discussed during the previous year's questions. You may want to read the slide. Then, of course, the governor is required to take an oath of affirmation, wherein the governor states or basically takes the oath to preserve, protect and defend the Constitution, and of course to also devote themselves to the service and well-being of the people of the state. Now, there are certain established conditions and conventions that are followed during the appointment of the governor, or let's say that ought to be ideally followed. So one is the outsider rule. Usually the governor is an outsider, meaning that he or she do not belong to the state in which the appointment is taking place, mainly to ensure that there is neutrality and impartiality in the office, and that the governor does not get unnecessarily involved in the local politics. And again, another convention is that the consultation with chief minister is ideal, so that the smooth functioning of the government is ensured, meaning that the chief minister and the cabinet should also be comfortable working with the governor in the office. However, usually this is not followed usually. Now next, we are talking about the process of appointment of lieutenant governors. So lieutenant governors and their appointments have been discussed in part 8 of the Constitution, and the articles concerned are 239 to 241. Now Article 239 states that all the union territories are going to be administered by the president through an administrator, the designation of which is going to be specified by the president himself or herself. Again, in 5 union territories, we use the designation of lieutenant governors, whereas in 4 territories of Chandigarh, Lakshadweep, Daman and Diu and Dadra and Nagar Haveli, the designation of administrator is used. What are those union territories where the designation of LG is used? So we have, of course, the National Capital Territory of Delhi, Jammu and Kashmir, Ladakh and Puducherry, along with Andaman and Nicobar Islands. However, Article 239 AA specifies this thing, specifically states that the governor of the National Capital Territory of Delhi is going to be designated as the lieutenant governor. So this is something that has been made explicit in a separate article. Now let's take a look at the appointment process of LGs, which is more or less similar to that of the governor. The appointment is done by the president by a warrant under his hand and seal, and the president exercises this power with the aid and advice of the Union Council of Ministers. Again, like a state governor, the lieutenant governor holds office during the pleasure of the president. And of course, as the governor, the grounds for removal are not specified in the constitution, and the central government may advise the president to transfer or remove the governor. Now, since we also touched upon various commissions and committees that looked at the center-state relations and the likes, let's also take a look at all those key recommendations that pertain to the appointment of the governor, starting with Sarkaria Commission, and all those recommendations were mentioned in your question itself. For example, the person should be from outside the state, or should not have active links with the politics, or should not have been actively involved in recent politics. So this is what is mentioned here. Then of course, Punchi Commission of 2007 recommended removing the doctrine of pleasure of the president and recommended that a process similar to impeachment should be introduced for the removal of governors. Now you may remember that when we are talking about Punchi Commission, P for Punchi and P for pleasure, so it's going to be easy for you to remember. Then again, we have the Venkatacharya Commission of 2002, which recommended that the governors should complete their 5-year term, and if removed, then the central government should actually consult the concerned chief minister of the state. Now with this, we come to the conclusion of the video, and I have brought for you a practice question. Please do solve the practice question and send me your answers in the comment section. If you liked today's video, kindly press the like button, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching.
For more informative content, like, share and subscribe, and do not forget to press the bell icon to get the notifications.